Danny, I'm no expert, but I think this is a bit too close. I think that's better. Nailed it. The protein pyramid and optimal muscle protein synthesis. Hello everyone, I am Jason van Heerden. I am a registered dietitian that has a passion for sports nutrition, and I'm excited to go through a 2023 article that has come out that talks about basically muscle and how the effects of protein have on that with regards to retaining and building the most amount of muscle that we can. So what is this protein pyramid? So this is actually something that I've created, and I find it's very, very useful in summarizing what the research has been saying over the last couple of years with regards to protein and maintaining and building the most amount of muscle that we can. So on the bottom level of this, let's say, pyramid, is that we have total protein. On the second level, we have then total protein distribution, and at the end or the top of the pyramid, we've got essential amino acids quality. So let's go through that in more detail. And I think the study is going to actually summarize it very well, and we'll refer back to the pyramid just now. So in this study, let's jump right into it. So what they did is, which was 50% female, 50% male, is that they split the people into two groups. Now, both of them had the same amount of protein given in 24 hours. But what they did was that the first group had an even distribution of protein in the day, and the second group had more of a skewed distribution. But again, the total was the same. So referring back to that pyramid, the total was the same, but we want to talk more about how the importance of your distribution in the day. So what they did, the first group, is that they then for breakfast, the 30% of their protein was given there, 30% was given at lunch, 30% was given at supper, and that extra 10% basically in snacks in the day. The second group had 15% protein at breakfast, 15% protein at lunch, and then 60% given at supper. And what they saw was that the muscle protein synthesis of the group that had the even distribution of protein in the day had higher levels of muscle protein synthesis in the day. But let's pause for a second. What is muscle protein synthesis, and why are we worried about it? So I've got very advanced equipment that I've brought to the office to explain the concept of muscle protein synthesis. So if we're looking at this advanced equipment, we've now got here muscle, right? So now you can imagine this as muscle, and what we're then trying to do is muscle protein synthesis is going to be how do we actually add protein to this muscle to make it bigger. Because at the end of the day, all the protein that we eat, meat, chicken, fish, eggs, beans, protein shake, whatever it might be, the end product is amino acids. And you can think of amino acids as this pink little block, right? Then and if this represents muscle is essentially a bunch of amino acids on top of each other. So muscle protein synthesis is basically the concept of adding these bricks, adding these amino acids onto the muscle, and then muscle protein breakdown has to do that now when basically these bricks get broken down. Now, why is this important? Because when we think building muscle, we often think, bodybuilders and athletes, but especially in adulthood, where over time we normally lose muscle mass over time, we can develop a condition called, here's the word of the day, sarcopenia. Right? So sarco, if we're looking at the word, sarco means muscle, penia means basically little. So it's basically as people get older, they can maybe stay at similar weights, but we'll actually find that percentage-wise, their muscle mass levels drop. And we can apply this concept to people trying to keep their muscle as well. So let's look at this, because if we're looking at this concept, we are trying to keep the rate of muscle protein synthesis higher than the breakdown, because otherwise we're going to end up with very little protein stores, which you can imagine leads to things like your increased risk of falling, getting injuries, etc., etc. Before we go further into the study, I also wanted to explain another interesting concept. Did you know that only 10 to 15% of the protein that we eat actually goes to our muscle? And did you know that 50% of the protein that we eat actually goes to repairing our gut lining, and as well goes to the liver? So, if you're only getting 10 to 15% of the protein that we're eating going to the muscles, we've got to really try and keep that, basically the high amounts of protein in that muscle in order to preserve it. But another interesting thing, that of the protein that is circulating, is that in the protein pool in the body, which is quite interesting, is that basically once it's done with the liver and then as well the gut, is that 40% of the protein of that now goes into basically repairing, or let's say building up, let's say the wall over here, but 35% to 50%, which if you take that average of that, is higher than the 40% we spoke about just now, that goes to muscle breaking down. Now, if you're looking at that on average, is that on average, people over time, the net breakdown of muscle will then be happening, especially when there's a lack of exercise. Now, in our community is that, what we're finding in society now is that there is less time to exercise. We are becoming more sedentary. So you can imagine that the rate of protein breaking down is actually becoming more and more, let's say, faster than the rate at which it's building up. So let's now return to the study and let's chat a little bit more about the muscle. So I mentioned the sedentary part in society. Why is that important in the context of this study? Because we can say, but what about our movement? What about exercise? And they did control it. So what they did is, yes, they gave the even group, the evenly distributed protein in the day, and the skewed group, 15%, 15%, 60%. And what they did was, these people were told to sit, and they didn't monitor them, sit the whole day or lay down. So they couldn't go do a bunch of gymming or move around or do physical labor, which might have affected the results. Because when you do exercise, so if you're looking at muscle, right? So if you're looking at muscle, if you are trying to build muscle, so this represents about 400 grams of muscle. If you just eat a whole bunch of protein, you're not necessarily going to gain a lot of muscle. You've actually got to have some stimulus. So let's say if you're doing push-ups, squats, whatever it might be, you actually get microfiber tears in here, which is good. And the protein that you then eat, the amino acids, would then come and build this muscle. So the only exercise that they did in this was 15 minutes of cycling 2 times a day over the whole, every day for the whole duration. So it wasn't a lot of, let's say, muscle building or bodybuilding type of exercises, quite basic movement. And then what they still saw there is that the group that had the more even protein distribution in the day gained significantly, or had a significantly high more muscle protein synthesis. So remember those amino acids coming into the muscle compared to the skewed group. But why would we now see this? Because the total protein is the same, the distribution is different. Surely an average over 24 hours, it would be very similar. And basically what they've seen, and we've seen this in previous studies, but they've replicated it here, that if you go over 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram per meal. So if you take a 100 kilogram person, that's 40 grams of protein a meal, and a 70 kilogram person, that's about 28 grams of protein a meal, is that you reach we can call it a saturation level. So what that then means is that your body, the rate at which the amino acids, let me get my advanced equipment again, the rate at which these bricks can actually now come into basically into this wall. There's a certain maximum rate that it can do it. And if you're saturating the body with too many of these bricks, it can only still put this in at a certain rate. So you kind of, inverted commas, lose out of the total brick, let's say, building process over the 24-hour period. But there was an interesting study that came out in 2015 that basically did a very similar type of experiment. But what they did see is that they didn't actually see the same results. They actually saw that it didn't really matter about your distribution as long as you got your total protein. But let's look at the key difference. So what they did in the 2015 study, I'll link the article here, is that they more used whey protein shake. So what that means, a brilliant quality source of protein. But what then happened there is that the whey protein is very quickly absorbed by the body. So you can imagine you drink the protein shake, that's where it now exits into the stomach. The body, because it's a powder, the body takes those amino acids quite quickly. So it goes into the body's pool quite quickly. Compared to, let's now look at what the 2023 study did. And what they did is they gave more whole food. So for example, our eggs and our meat. So if you take 50 grams of protein from protein shake, by the way, if you're looking at a chicken breast, a 90-gram chicken breast only has 21 grams of protein. So just note when I mentioned earlier about, let's say, the 40 grams of protein, for a 100 kilogram person, that's about 2 chicken breasts to get to that saturation level. But now returning to what I said now, is that when you now looking at the protein shake, exits the body quickly, if you take 50 grams of that protein shake versus 50 grams of protein from the meat will take about sometimes 6 to 8 hours to fully digest and to basically give those amino acids into the body, versus protein shake, which depending on the protein shake, if you have it with milk or not, is anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. So you can imagine, if you're having protein shake, let's say very often, you have these big spikes compared to if you were having, let's say, meat the whole day, even though it's the same amount of protein, the distribution in the day is actually quite different. So that just goes to show the importance of, yes, your total protein intake, but that we're not going over those saturation levels that we spoke about, the most amount of amino acids we can put on that brick wall, so to say, but having our whole foods. But also, just from sports dietitian doing this for basically 6 years now, is that if my clients ask me, but where should I be drinking my protein shake? That would more go in the gaps in the day. So let's say, for example, for breakfast, you have, let's say, some eggs and toast, and that's now those eggs are taking 6 hours to fully break down, but then they're only having their lunch at about 2 or 3 o'clock. You'll find that, okay, but you're kind of maybe having a bit of a gap of those amino acids being lower at, let's say, 11, 12 o'clock. Having your protein shake there would actually be ideal, because then you go, basically that saturation levels goes more optimal, more quicker. And if you can stay within basically a more even distribution of protein in the day, we can get more muscle protein synthesis overall. So why is this significant? Because yes, I did mention at the beginning of the video it was for more older people, but even more so that if you are not active, if you're finding that, look, as you're aging, or you know someone that's aging that's not getting that much activity, and you can almost slowly see them wasting away, and it is going to be difficult for them to go and exercise, maybe because they have a condition, is that not only can we look at the total protein, but we can then look at how we distribute that protein in the day to basically preserve more of that muscle mass. But what about the top of that pyramid that we spoke about? So we've got total protein, the distribution, but what about the essential amino acids? And what are essential amino acids? So they are basically proteins which are essential to the body, that we need for all of our functionings in our body, like our enzymes, muscle repair, and then as well for our organs. But we need that from our diet. And things that are high in essential amino acids are, for example, our meat, our chicken, our fish, our eggs, our beans, our protein shakes. But then there are some other proteins, or foods that have protein, but are not exactly high in essential amino acids. So let's say, for example, nuts, for example. Do they have protein? Yes, but they don't have as many, the amount of quantity per 100 grams of protein of those essential amino acids, and you'd need to have more nuts in the day, which also means more calories, in order to try and get those protein levels. So that's why it's so important to be looking at the quality and the quantity and the distribution of your protein in the day to get the most out of this. Now, this study was now done on people that have been relatively, inactive. So imagine the importance now on bodybuilders. If you look at the average, gym video of a bodybuilder, every 2 hours they're eating. And that's the reason they're saturating that muscle protein synthesis to get the most amount of protein, the net protein gain in their bodies. So what are the official guidelines? So now this is more that they've seen now with the higher, let's say high ages, is that they've recommended that we want to be eating 3 to 4 main meals a day that are basically spread out 3 to 5 hours apart, and each of those meals getting 0.4 to 0.6 grams of protein per kilogram at that meal in that day. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, but in essence, what we're going to talk about is, as dietitians, we look at you. We look at your context, we look at your activity, we look at your build, we look at all these aspects that we're not just getting, let's say, the total amount of protein, but we're getting the optimal, maximal amount of results that we can if you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to, let's say, gain weight, but at the same time, if you're trying to lose your weight, but try and keep those muscle stores in the body. Because often I'll ask my clients, listen, are you trying to get toned and slim, right? Or are you trying to just be thin? And the thing is that you can end up at the same weight, but if you're trying to be toned, which a lot of people are telling me they want to do, yes, it's got to do with body fat percentage, but a lot of it has to do how much muscle do you have? How much muscle did you preserve while you were losing that weight? And it has to look at that. So we make practical diets for you that look at your total protein, the distribution of protein in the day, making sure you're getting your essential amino acids to get the best results for you. We'll see you guys in the next video. So what they did is that they took a group. Nailed it.